and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
Breathe out. Finally here on Bigger Ten, we get to talk some ball. I am Steve Deace with my co-host Aaron McIntire. Brother, are you ready to finally talk some ball? I am ready.
Absolutely. And I think maybe an underrated part of this is that we actually get to anticipate and look forward to this for, about a month before it actually happens, because that's my favorite part of the year anyway, is the anticipation for football season. So you get a little slice of that just a little bit later in the year this time.
I mean, I've enjoyed watching the games, but doesn't it, and I know this is Bigger Ten and we're not supposed to say this part out loud, but doesn't it kind of feel like with the SEC starting this weekend that the season is actually really starting, right?
Sure.
And then it will feel even more official a month from now when our league gets going, right? Because let's face it, those are the two big boys, right? Are the Big Ten and the SEC. Well, we are going to spend the episode here this week breaking down schedule version 3.0, This Time It Counts. The one that we think is actually going to stick, and that's going to be the theme for this week's Big Five on Bigger Ten. So, Aaron, I've got 5 big takeaways from the Big Ten schedule, and then you and I will discuss. Let's begin with the very first one. Could we see the East Division champion and maybe the Big Ten champion? Since we've gone to division play, the East Division champion has won the Big Ten championship game every time. Could we see this thing determined as early as week 2? That's when the top 2 consensus preseason teams will play. Ohio State is at Penn State in week 2. Now, this would typically be the whiteout game, but there isn't going to be a whiteout with no fans this year. So, I mean, week 2. I know it's a long season. There's a lot of COVID issues that could come up with the testing and quarantines and things of that nature, but the Big Ten ain't messing around by putting this game at week 2.
Yeah, and that surprises me a little bit. And I would say if this was a normal year, obviously, and you had fans in the stands, the crazy people in Happy Valley, this would be a closer game. Last season in Columbus, it was a slobber knocker. I mean, it seemed like guys were dropping like flies. This year, it's going to be a slobber knocker of probably, I would say, pretty sloppy play, because it seems like for a lot of these teams, it's taken 1 or 2 weeks of actually gameplay to get up to full speed. And for these teams, even though there's a lot of talent on both sides, if there's no COVID cases, I think Ohio State will have a pretty easy time, because I just think you've got the best quarterback on the field, and I just don't think we're going to see anything like we saw last year between these two teams. And I don't think it was super close last year, but it was a good game. It was a competitive game that was fun to watch. But it is surprising to see that matchup so early in the year. And I think they're trying to put all the. I don't know. Again, with the last schedule as well as with this one, I'm not really sure what exactly the strategy or the plan was. At this point, I don't really care. I'm just glad to have football. But it is kind of surprising to see that matchup pretty early.
Several handicappers I respect will tell you, number 1 point spread home field advantage in college football, Penn State and the whiteout. It's about a touchdown difference. Although all time, Penn State is just about, I think, like 1 or 2 games above 500 in the whiteout. So that's something else to keep in mind, because it's not relevant this year. There won't be one. All right, let's go to our next Big 5 takeaway from the 2020 Big Ten schedule, version 3.0. This had to be on purpose, right?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, okay. The Nebraska schedule. Now, I mean, these are teams that have been protected on their schedule for this season all along. So it's not so much the 8 games they were given, but look at how this thing begins. At Ohio State, Wisconsin at home, at Northwestern, which has played very well against Nebraska in recent years, because frankly, everybody has, and then Penn State at home. So Penn State, Wisconsin, and Ohio State are the consensus preseason top 3 teams in the Big Ten. Nebraska was going to play them anyway, but now they're going to play them in 3 of the first 4 games with no offseason, nothing. They're coming out of the gate with those 3 games in the first month. That cannot be a random coincidence. Somebody, I gotta believe, over there at those offices there in suburban Chicago is sending Nebraska a message after they were getting, I guess, a little uppity for the Big Ten's for the Big Ten's preferences, because they were one of the schools leading the charge against the shutdown of the conference, and the Empire strikes back. Aaron, if you see that schedule.
Yes, I think actually for Nebraska, isn't this a great chip on the shoulder, though? You have to take this as a slap in the face. So one, you were the school. Let's be honest here. You and Ohio State, to a lesser extent, maybe Iowa as well. But you were the most outspoken, maybe even punching above your weight outspoken in terms of trying to get the season going again. I mean, there were those rumors that were not flatly denied right out of the gate about leaving the Big Ten as well. So you're punching above your weight in throwing your weight around. You have to take some credit for getting the season back. And on top of that, the league is going to come down and try to slap you with a tough schedule. Isn't that a motivational tool? Now, starting out with Ohio State and Wisconsin back-to-back, I don't know how you get up for those games, but still.
That can beat up your football team.
That can beat up your football team, absolutely. Yeah. So at least, maybe lightning will strike once or twice those first few weeks. And maybe that can serve as maybe sort of a springboard for Nebraska, but they have to be feeling the oats, and maybe they'll live to regret that. But that is definitely intentional there. I mean, there's no way that's not.
Here's your reward for winning a public relations battle with the Big Ten Conference. Yep. They have broken their foot off in your backside, because that can. And if you look at Nebraska's roster, my roster ratings, they're still a recruiting class away. I mean, they have had a lot of attrition there under Scott Frost. And it's not just guys that were there under the previous regime, it's guys he's brought in. They've had a lot of attrition there too. And so their numbers aren't there yet. And to take those three teams on in the first 4 weeks, and then say what you want about Northwestern, even when they're bad, they are physical. I mean, you feel it coming out of playing a Pat Fitzgerald team. That will test the mettle of your depth right away, coming right out of the gate. And for a program that has gotten off to terrible starts now 2 years in a row, if they start off 1-3, 0-4 again, can you only imagine what will go on down in Lincoln again if they have another bad start under Scott Frost?
Yeah, part of it, I mean, this is a tough schedule in a weird year. This year of all years, I think there might be some understanding there. But still, your point still stands. I mean, this 3 years in a row of getting off to a terrible start under Frost, not good. Not good.
The game. There was a lot of conversation with Schedule 2.0 when it was moved to, October 24th, actually, was the date that the Michigan-Ohio State game was supposed to be played. Back when the whole thing was on the epidemiological curve, let's get as many of these games in early as we possibly can, because we're not sure we can finish the season. Then it became, now with the epidemiological curve, we don't know that we can start the season. Well, now there's some normalcy restored. The Michigan-Ohio State game will be the final regular season game for both teams, as it has been, except in years when Michigan's played a couple of games in Hawaii since, I think it is 1935. And December the 12th is when that game will be played in Columbus. So it's the most wonderful time of the year. If you're an Ohio State fan, your Christmas will come a little bit early. You'll get your perennial punking of Michigan, and then you'll get a chance to celebrate, the holidays.
Yeah, this is really funny. I mean, I've been around you for probably 4 or 5 days by the time most people are listening to this after the schedules come out. And like when you've talked about this and talked about the schedule, like you've like barely mentioned the game at all. It's like this game doesn't even exist to you, because it's almost like this game doesn't exist to you. So I think when it comes to the game, Ohio State versus Michigan, it seems like for the last 5-6 years, going upwards of a decade, you've been having this ongoing conversation about how much more Ohio State takes seriously football, and especially the game, than Michigan. That can serve you in a couple of different ways when it comes to home versus away. I believe anyway. When you're at home, you're feeding off of the bucknut, the energy of the bucknuts. When you're away, you really want to tick all those 100,000 fans of Michigan off as well. What happens when there's absolutely no crowd noise?
I know it's going to be surreal.
It's going to be really, really weird, and it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to that. So that's about the only thing that's kind of compelling, other than the odd date. Could be a snow game. That'd be super cool. But that's about the only thing compelling I find about this game.
It's the 70th anniversary this year of one of the most famous games in the history of the rivalry, the 1950 Snow Bowl. You know, that little montage of the historic blizzard you see every year when Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer comes on, right? That's essentially what happened in Ohio that year. Could you see something like that again on December the 12th when Michigan and Ohio State play? It may take something like that for Michigan to get off the schneid. I mean, the game is dead to me as a fan. I have to cover it if we're going to talk about the Big Ten. But for me as a fan, until Michigan wins it again, the game is dead to me. I can't get emotionally invested after what the emasculation I've gone through over the past couple of years. Hey, one more thing on this quickly. Over at Wolverine Digest this week, we had a television executive, so you can probably guess the network, tell us in confidence that if there was a COVID shutdown of either Michigan and Ohio State that cost them the game, that a television network would prefer to have that game moved back a week and the Big Ten championship game canceled than to skip that game and play the Big Ten championship game. That the amount of money they make off of the game is way more than the Big Ten championship. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've got two of the largest alumni bodies in probably the world. I know at least in Michigan State, or Michigan's case, that's true. So that makes some sense. But I think the icon that the game is compared to the Big Ten championship game, which has only been around for seconds compared to the actual game. I think that does make sense. It is still surprising, though, that they just want to cancel something that could send a team to the playoff, the college football playoff, but it doesn't surprise me too much.
All right, next up on our Big Five on Bigger Ten, Champions Week. We talked about this last week when we were kind of reacting to what the Big Ten presented in real time, but now we've got a little bit more information. Now, Tom Dienhart used to work for the Big Ten Network. He's now with the Purdue rival site. He says that his sources tell him this was actually Jim Harbaugh's idea at Michigan, which was to put in a ninth game in case they couldn't play bowl games, and then just to have it be a cross-divisional affair based on what the standings are at the time. These will take place on campus sites, except for the Big Ten championship game, which of course is going to be indoors at Lucas Oil Field or Stadium in Indianapolis. So now that we know a little bit more about this, I still love this idea. I might even love it more. I might even love the idea of making this a permanent thing in the conference, meaning you have 8 standard conference games, and then the 9th one is this Champions Week where our teams are playing every single week on that final weekend. I love this idea. What do you think?
I still think it's an inspired idea as well. Absolutely. I like, depending on how this goes, I like the idea of making this somewhat of a permanent fixture. Make it the 9th game every season. If you are going to have 9 conference games, make it the 9th game every season. Make the schedule anything to make it a little bit more formulaic and a little bit more parity driven. Here's what the matchups would have looked like last year. These are the final standings for the 2019-2020 season. Of course, Ohio State, Wisconsin, that was a great Big Ten championship game.
Rematch. The first 3 games are rematches.
Yep. I would have loved to see a rematch of Penn State, Minnesota. Would have loved to see a rematch of Michigan, Iowa. The rest I could take or leave. But here's the thing, Steve. Wouldn't you love to go into an offseason where a team like Purdue is just pissed off at Maryland? The fan base of Purdue is pissed off at Maryland. The fan base of Rutgers is ticked off at Nebraska because they got the bragging rights for the worst team in the Big Ten. Wouldn't that be awesome? And the only way you do that is by trying something like this and maybe sticking with it for a little while. So I do think it is an inspired idea, and I hope. I know Barry Alvarez said they're going to try to avoid rematches. I don't care if it's a good game. I want to see it again.
Yeah. I love the idea. What do you think about 7 trophies?
7 trophies?
And the trophies get demonstrably smaller the further down the standings we get, right? So you got the big championship trophy for winning the Big Ten in Indianapolis, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And if you win that 7th place game, Okay. Yes. It's like something you just kind of pin to your chest.
Yep.
Okay. What do you think? Do you like the idea of making all of those like trophy games? You won the Champions Week game. What do you think?
I think that's a cool idea. But they got to be more than just like rote trophies. You got to have like for the 7th place team, you got to have like a stinky old Jim Delaney boot or something like that.
When I was a kid, we used to play in the Gus Macker 3-on-3 basketball tournament in Michigan. And one year we got into the toilet bowl and finished like 2nd or 3rd or something. That's the losers bracket.
Mm-hmm.
Man, the trophy was a little trophy with a little toilet bowl on it. I love that freaking thing. I kept it for years. I lost it moving many years ago. I wish I still had it. So I don't know. If I was a Rutgers player, I'd probably get a kick out of getting some kind of, memento for knowing my team was going to suck every year, but we got this one win. I don't know. There's something to think about. All right, let's one more here. Early odds for winning the Big Ten championship game out of Vegas. This is from Superbook Sports. And they've got Ohio State 4-9 odds to win, Wisconsin at 7-1, Penn State at 7-1, Minnesota at 16-1. I'm going to tell you right now, though, in a COVID year where Justin Fields tests positive the 1st of December and he's basically done for the season, and that changes the whole dynamic. There are a couple of teams on here. I don't believe they're going to win the championship. In fact, I'd probably pick them 3rd in their divisions. But if you're going to give me 2 programs with the top right now, in my power ratings, the top 2 coaches in the league in terms of total resume are Ferentz and Harbaugh. If you're going to tell me you're going to give me 20-1 odds and 60-1 odds in a year, I mean, this would be the kind of year a culture program like Iowa maybe has its ducks in a row.
Yep.
Pulls, has a surprising year with there's so much, ups and downs. Michigan, at worst, has the 3rd, likely 2nd most talented roster in the league. I don't know what our sports book here in William Hill has put out odds on this yet, but if they do, and those are the odds, I'm putting 10, 20, 30 bucks down on Michigan and Iowa just on those numbers alone. Again, I don't predict them to win it. I think Ohio State will, but those kinds of odds are pretty enticing in a year where there's going to be this much randomness, I think.
Yeah, I'll probably, if they even offer, I'll probably put 25 bucks on Iowa and Michigan, probably not Minnesota. Here's another team that I'd put.
Indiana?
I'd put 5 or 10 bucks on. Well, Indiana, yeah, maybe like 10 bucks. I'd put probably 5 or 10 bucks on Purdue because I don't think it's 201 that a perfect storm could happen. Like
if they can get Rondale Moore to come back,
3 or 4 weeks of the season, I don't think that's 200-1 odds. I think it's 100-1 odds, but I don't think it's 200-1 odds.
Hell, I mean, I'd put 50 to 100 bucks on Wisconsin and Penn State at 7-1.
Yeah,
I don't think those are bad.
Oh, no.
That's a good bet too.
Yep.
For that matter.
Yep.
So something to think about. We'll come back and we'll play our weekly game of Big Ten Would You Rather next. Here it is, our weekly game of Big Ten Would You Rather here on Bigger Ten. And Aaron, this one is for you to lead it off. Would you rather be Rutgers or Maryland week 1? In other words, who has the better chance to pull an outright upset?
So I look at this earlier, and I think Rutgers versus Michigan State actually has a better chance of pulling the upset because you've got the culture already in place at Northwestern when it comes to Maryland. I believe that's who they play first. Michigan State, complete upheaval over the offseason, and upheaval even more than every other team in the country, getting a new coach in. So I think it's Rutgers. You've got a chance and of course Rutgers has a new coach as well. But when you've sucked for so long, you're on the upswing.
He happens to be the best coach the school's ever had.
Yeah. You have to think you're about to start an upswing, hopefully. And when you've had the best coach you've ever had in terms of D'Antonio at Michigan State, and he's gone, you got to start thinking you're starting to come back down. So I think it's Rutgers. Next one is for you. Would you rather get slaughtered and have a better reputation amongst your players, fans, and college football world, or vice versa?
I think
I'm
I
talking
would
about Nebraska here, of course.
Okay, I think I would rather win. So I'd rather get slaughtered or have a better reputation. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'd rather win. Because if I win, the reputation will take care of itself. Victory has 1,000 fathers, as JFK once noted. Defeat is an orphan. So I would rather win because I think if you win, We have a tendency to retcon people's reputations because we like winners. We're Americans. I'd rather win. Aaron, would you rather take Ohio State or the field to win the 2020 Big Ten title?
As a better, the field. I just think there's too many unknowns if those are the only things. Now, if you're asking me to pick specific teams just for prediction, it's Ohio State because they've got probably the second or third best quarterback in the country. But as a better, if I just had, 7-2 odds or whatever they are on Ohio State versus minus 110 on the field, I'll take minus 110 on the field any day.
See, I don't even think this is close, by the way.
Really?
Now, our Twitter poll will come up here in a bit. We'll see what the audience says. But in this year, with the testing, remember, Ohio State had to shut down already this summer. We keep forgetting that, okay? So with the testing and everything else, to me, the field is a much better bet. I wouldn't even think about that.
Absolutely. This last one is for you. Would you rather play Northwestern or Minnesota in your first game?
I don't think so. Since I'm looking at this as a Michigan fan and Minnesota's our first game, I don't think this is as cut and dried as people think. You have a very motivated Northwestern under Pat Fitzgerald. They had everything go wrong for them last year. They have a credible quarterback in Peyton Ramsey, who has played well against Michigan in the past. And I was at that Michigan-Northwestern game 2 years ago. I mean, we have a team loaded with pros, and they went up 17-0 and should have won the game. We pulled it out at the end. Minnesota, of course, has the more talented team. But I also think for Michigan, if you're Jim Harbaugh, getting your team's attention for that game with Minnesota winning those 11 games is an easier motivation than a Northwestern team that went 1-8 in the Big Ten last year. So I guess I'd rather open with Northwestern, even though I don't think it's as cut and dried maybe as people think. That'll do it for this week's edition of Bigger 10 Would You Rather. We'll come back, look at our Twitter poll results as well as our question of the week next. This week's Twitter poll results. We teased this question a few minutes ago. Given the uncertainty of COVID testing, sit-outs, etc., are you taking Ohio State or the field to win the 2020 Big Ten football title? Overwhelmingly, our Twitter audience said we're taking Ohio State 2-1, 66 to 33%. I don't think it's that close at all. In fact, I would take the field. And I think Ohio State is a prohibitive favorite. But guys, the uncertainty of everything going on, here's something to think about. Ohio State and Penn State can't play week 2 because of COVID. One of those teams has to shut down. Get to the end of the year. Somehow, some way, Michigan beats Ohio State. Or Penn State has played more games than Ohio State. And so they get to the Big Ten championship game because Ohio State is another game that gets canceled too. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
There's so many variables. Rutgers doesn't handle their business again. So Ohio State is 6-0 in the Big Ten and Penn State is 7-0. Penn State goes. So many of those variables. To me, it's the field hands down. All right, let's get to this week's question of the week. Which will cause the most upheaval this season? The 5% or less positive team test rate to avoid a shutdown, or the 21-day required quarantine for a player with a confirmed positive test? That's from James. Aaron, I don't know what you think, but I think too much has been made about the 5% positive test. Michigan's done like 5,000 tests since June. They have a 1.1 positivity rate. Okay, we're going to have a couple of teams that are going to need to shut down. We saw it in practices. I think we all know Rutgers can't handle their business. There'll be a team that'll have to shut down at least once. There will be some of that. But I think it's that 21-day quarantine, because if it happens to one or two players at the same position, and it's a premium position, or your starting quarterback, that changes the trajectory of your entire season. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think the question to this, or the answer to this question is yes. I think they'll both have an impact to some degree, but I do tend to agree with your assessment that because of the advancement and the track record that some of these teams already have with the testing, I don't think that the 5% is going to be as big of a deal to most teams as what it's made out. It is still ridiculous, I think, but I don't think it's still going to wreak as much havoc. I mean, 21 day, it just all depends on where that strikes. So if you're a team like Northwestern and you have dog doo-doo at quarterback with the exception of one guy, and that one guy gets COVID, your whole team's going to be dog doo-doo like last year, or at least your offense is going to be dog doo-doo. It just depends on where that COVID strikes, and it's just unfortunate because most of these guys aren't going to be hospitalized. Some of them may not even be symptomatic. Fortunately, also, it sounds like they're using the same testing method that the NFL and NBA is using as well.
Yep.
Look at the positives or lack thereof in those two leagues. So that's a good sign.
That's going to do it for this week's episode of Bigger Ten. No episode next week, and we're back the week after with a full fall camp preview. When we're back here in 2 weeks, Big Ten teams will be in fall camp. Cannot wait. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Bigger Ten. Like, rate, share, subscribe, whether it's YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, no matter how you access this show each week. Thank you to each and every one of you. Signing off, Steve Deace here for Aaron McIntire. Until the next time on Bigger Ten.